welcome to Radio with Pictures on FemTalk 89 FM, live on My TV, and we're coming to you live this week from Nausori. Management and reduction strategies and inclusive of climate change. The Women's Weather Watch reports are highlighting that gender inequalities still exist in these areas, and we've got to take into account women's rights as well as gender inequality policy commitments, whether it's to do with humanitarian assistance, whether it's to do with the protection of communities, particularly women, children, the elderly, and persons with disabilities. And that climate change and disaster risk reduction and management are quite interlinked at the community level, whether you're talking about food security or health security. And so, Asanada, we're going to come to you first. The Tikina of Buretu, several villages are being affected, as you say, by climate change, the impact of rising sea levels. Please tell us about what you've been seeing in the last 40 years of living in that community.
Thank you, Sharon. Climate change is a reality, and it destroyed about 5 villages in this Tikina of Buretu. Buretu, Naibadao, Mataino, Bodio, and Daku. So we've been facing a lot on this climate change in our areas.
How has it worsened when we've had more devastating cyclones and heavy rains in particular? You're not in the Delta area. We'll talk to Mbulu about that and Corona. But what's happening up there? Every time there's heavy rain, what's been happening?
Heavy rain and rise of seawater level is causing flooding in our areas.
And that's affecting your food gardens? Where were you planting 40 years ago, and where are you planting now?
40 years back, we're planting in a proper land, and now we're planting just on the beside the road. Every day that can feed families, but not wider like wedding or any occasion that comes from the land with food.
So the space of land available to you for planting, for food production has reduced?
Reduced, yes.
So how much are you planting now? What, say, 10 years ago, what were you able to plant? Were you selling it at the market? Were you selling it at the roadside? What were you doing?
No, we just feed for the family.
So just for the family consumption.
Yes.
And what are you planting?
Cassava, taro, but anyway, when it comes from the seawater and the rainwater, it destroys all our crops. That's what we ended now in our villages.
How are you organizing at the village level? I mean, are you sitting down? Are the women participating in decision making about we need to change the crops that we're growing, or this is what's affecting us? We need to have access to more decision making about we need to change the crops that we're growing, or this is what's affecting us. We need to have access to more.
Away from the USAID and the university, which help us to put recometers on the bank of the river, so that can be more protection from our land washing away when we having rise seawater level and rainwater. It washes away all our lands, and we had our villages is doing some seawalls to protect our land. But at present, 40 years back, half of the villages is away, washed away from the land.
So you're basically managing the erosion, but what are you saying as women, what needs to be done in addition to the management of the soil erosion?
Now we women, we helping our husbands in our plant bell and row, some green veggies for our family, to feed our family in a small land.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing, Asanada.
Thank you, Sharon.
Bulu, bringing it down to the Rewa Delta area, what have been your experiences when it's come to heavy rain, cyclones? What have been the strategies adopted by you and your family and your community? What was the worst ever situation you faced?
I came to live around the Delta since 1975, and since then we have about 2 floodings that had flooded the whole area. The roadings were affected, the crops, productivity would have been affected as well. But just lately, when I'm so grateful to the irrigation department that had implemented the dredging of the Rewa River in its small streams. It helped so much for the dredging of the river, and from the soil that they get from the river, and now spill over to the land, and that I would say is the reclamation of the land.
Okay, so it's another sort of reclaiming the soil, but from 1975 we've had Hurricane Bibi, we've had, the devastating floods, 2009, we've had the most recent cyclone. How have you seen the changes? I mean, what's been the impact of these weather patterns, of the change in the river on the community? Are you doing what us and others having to do and plant elsewhere? What's been the community strategy?
Well, we do our crop, farming, but on a very small scale.
Okay.
Because of this poor drainage system in our area.
Okay. So for most of the people in your area, they don't have access to land to plant?
Well, for Itoke, I would say they have enough land, but not for the Indo-Fijians.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mbulu. Corona, Tonga Village, I'd say it's under sea level, right? You've had serious drainage problems and flooding problems, and your story was probably one of the first stories we shared as part of our Women's Weather Watch campaign. Over time, what's been happening at the village?
Okay, for the moment, thank you, Sharon. For the moment, we've been experiencing soil erosion, which affects the place where we plant our crops for household, and for the others, it's for the economize, for the source of living. And most of the land have been eroded away due to rains and the flooding that comes. And we are experiencing lots of problems that affects mostly the women and the children.
So last week we were in Nandi, and the women from the Wailoaloa Beach community were saying that they've been trained that if there's been non-stop rain for 2 hours, that's when they have to put in their evacuation plan. What's the evacuation plan for people that live on Tonga Island?
Okay, our evacuation plans that whenever there's a disaster, so we contact the relevant authorities, like from the village there's a Turanganikoro on where we can evacuate these people for the times during disaster.
But do you have, I mean, obviously one of the things we were discussing that sometimes 2 hours is not relevant. You're right by, you're in the Rewa Delta, so to speak. Who are you, what is the time frame to evacuate?
Okay, the time when we evacuate is when we look into the river, there's a rise in, the rise in water. So that is the time we prepare, so that for the evacuation of these people that are affected during this rain.
And are you doing the same as the women in Wailoaloa? Is it like 2 hours of heavy rain, or are you saying, okay, it's been steady rain for half an hour plus it's high tide? What do you look for so that other people also know that, okay, this is when we've really got to be serious about evacuation?
Actually, for us, like 2 hours rain, it's not like, but we look into like, if the rain comes in for like 1 whole week non-stop rain, so that's the time when we'll look for the evacuation of these people.
So you're quite comfortable with like 5 days of rain. So where do you evacuate? Because you are pretty much right by the river. It's you're very vulnerable. You're under the bridge as well. What's your high level ground? Where do you go?
So the high level grounds are along the river, but we've got evacuation center on the other side where the road comes from. So there are the community center and the LDS hall there, and also the Catholic hall.
So you're able to stay on the island. You don't have to come to the church hall or things like that. Okay, thanks, Corona. Manju, we've been talking about the impact of weather patterns, whether you call it climate change or whether they're floods and heavy rains or cyclones. It obviously has an impact on the health of the community. What have you been finding? What have you been seeing?
Thank you, Sharon. Due to climate change, it's really very, I mean, it really affects the health of our people, like in our community. When it's raining, it's like a heavy rain, the drains are blocked, and the water comes right on the road. So it's very hard for us to travel from Korodiri to town because we can't go through that water.
For someone that doesn't live in Nausori, explain Korodiri. How far from Nausori town are you talking about?
Korodiri is about 30 minutes from town by bus, and yeah, it will take about 15 minutes by car.
Okay. So the drainage is a problem. It causes flooding, and just general heavy rain means, does it make it difficult for people to get to work and children to go to school?
Yes, Sharon. When it's about raining for half an hour and when steady rain, downfall, then it's very hard, and the water comes on the road. And the drains are really blocked because I think there's very less drains beside the roads.
Okay.
So
drainage is a key issue. They were talking about drainage in Nandi as well, that without clear and proper drainage systems, that's where the water collects, obviously, and the flooding, the vulnerability to flooding increases. So I'm going to ask the four of you, what was, really the worst possible experience you went through, whether it was a cyclone or heavy rain or flooding? Asanada? What was the worst experience, and what did you have to do?
That I know in Kina.
Okay.
All flooded, so we have to travel by boat so that we can survive. No place to evacuate at that time. But now we had evacuated the school. Ratubikosa Primary School is there, so that we can go there when we had a disaster like that. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you. So that's great to hear that there have been lessons learned and there have been responses put in place in that way. What's been important for you is the evacuation center. Corona?
Thank you, Sharon. The worst thing that I've experienced was in 1972 when Harkan Bibi comes, or Mbembe and the other way. There was no evacuation center, and we've been evacuated from the village to come up to Cornivia Research Station from this, the government officials were transporting us with a boat from there to reach Ndavilevu, then from Ndavilevu to Cornivia, with this swift current that was going on, that causing us women and children to be evacuated to the right place at that time.
And like you were saying, now you have these evacuation centers on the island. So that's been very important. Bulu, worst experience ever?
Yeah, it was in when we had this Hurricane Kina. We normally have a Nakelo District School as our evacuation center, but it happened so sudden that it was too late for us to transport the elderly. I would say I was fortunate enough to accommodate some of the elderly from the nearby village that we live in. Since I was living in a double-story building, I had accommodated about few elderly and a sick person as well. So that was one of my worst experience so far.
And what are the changes that you've seen since then?
We have learned so much from the awareness that had been done for this disaster risk management group, that we are prepared for the evacuation centers, and most of the people have been educated. So I'm so happy that most of the awareness had reached our communities.
Okay, thanks, Bulu. Renuka, worst experience ever for you?
Sharon, I'm staying my house is in Nanduru, but most of the time I spend my time in Korodiri because of our church. There is a church in Korodiri, just newly built. So most of the time I'm in Korodiri. So I can see the way the drains and the roads are in Korodiri. It's not very good. So I'm going to talk about Korodiri most of the time. But from my experience, Nanduru Road was really very bad in Kina. My house was the water went up to just about to touch the roof of my house. Still, never, it was on the piles too, but the water was so high, and so we had to move with little children to the other people's house on the Bilimbili. And my son, he really fell in the water, and so by the grace of God, he was not drowned. But yeah, I faced that difficulties to going to some other people's house where there is no water, no electricity, just had to lie down on the floor and feed our children whatever they give us.
And wait.
And wait.
Lessons learned since then? I mean, what have you seen improvements, and what could be additional improvements in relation to responses, times of heavy rain or cyclones?
Times of heavy rain and cyclones, now I think it's quite good. I'm speaking on Nanduru Road. The drains are there, they are deepened, and the road is also built nicely done. And one thing is just the water that comes on the road. Still, it's the same problem for a long time, and now still it is the same.
Okay.
Yes.
Bulu, you mentioned that you're happy with the improvement in information and awareness since the experiences to do with Cyclone Kina. Do you think that needs to be more regular? Because I get the sense that we don't have that traditional cyclone hurricane season anymore. So should we have more regular information all the time?
Yeah, I think I would recommend that awareness should be done regularly.
And what's the best way to reach women and children in the communities? How would you like this awareness delivered? Is it enough just to have it on the radio or on television, or should it be more awareness raising programs through visits, community outreach?
No, I would say that it should be more awareness, community outreach to be done, because most of us are not doing access to radios, neither TV.
Okay, thank you. Corona, you're obviously pleased with with the developments around evacuation centres, but what else could be developed? What are the other strategies, particularly for women and children?
I would recommend the development of health services to be improved, and the idea of having village dispensaries.
I'm meaning more
yeah,
towards
yeah,
during natural disasters.
yes.
So
during
what
natural-
what could help communities be more informed and more aware?
I think the women and children to be aware of their health, and also for their lives, that they are access to NCDs and diseases like that.
Okay, that's another for you and your community and other communities like you who are really facing that impact on a day-to-day basis. What kind of information would you like to see brought to your communities and shared with other communities so that people can better understand what's happening to our environment?
More workshops, Sharon.
Explain that, please.
More workshop to our women and men, especially men, so that they can know what to do to stand on their lives in the community.
And what would be included in the workshop? What would you like, what is that information you'd like the men to receive then?
To receive what they have to do in each family, in their own family,
What
every day.
What would you recommend that men do? If someone was to ask you in this workshop, we want to educate the men, what should the men be educated about?
Grog consumption.
Grog consumption.
Yes,
Okay,
so
that's got a connection to climate
yes,
change,
please.
right?
And
Explain that.
because when they have grog consumption every day or every night, in the morning, ladies are very struggle with the families for the income source and the everyday lives in our villages. So we need the child protection too. Workshops in our community, in our Tikina, very much. Thank you, Sharon.
And in relation to adapting to food production, do you think there needs to be more awareness or training about the type of food that should now be grown or planting?
Yeah, we we really need that from the agriculture to show us what the type of crops we plant in a small land so that it can help our families in our Tikina.
Thank you so
Sharon.
much, Asanada. So, Asanada, Bulu, Corona, and Renuka, we're into the final stage of our discussion for this morning. What's your main recommendation in relation to issues to do with whether we call it Women's Weather Watch, whether we call it related to climate change or natural disasters? Renuka, what else? What are your key recommendations? What's your key recommendation for today?
Thank you, Sharon. My recommendation is to women to be to get educated about how to keep healthy and to keep their homes safe and clean, and not just wait for the government to come and clean the drains, but we as a woman, as a community whole, we can clean our own drains by getting together with other community and share this burden. And also
And do you see that being not just the responsibility of the women to go around, you know, cleaning the home and cleaning the community? I can hear you all agreeing. Who should be helping the women? I'd say women supervise, and who does the cleaning?
women should supervise and the men should clean the drains.
Okay.
with the children too.
Okay, all right.
Thank
Thank you. Bulu, what's your recommendation?
I would rank the most important recommendation that I would say that the relevant authorities to urgently look into building proper drainage system.
That's a key, isn't it,
Yeah.
for flood prevention. Corona?
My key recommendation, if the relevant authorities should look into the Tonga rivers being eroded, if there's something could be done to stop this.
Yeah, they kind of forgot you when the bridge was built. You need to be remembered now, shouldn't you? And finally, you, Asanada, what's your recommendation?
My recommendation is to be good to each other in the family so that they can stand and speak up what they should do in their own family everyday lives.
And a reduction in Yangona
Reduction
consumption.
in Ghana consumption, please.
Okay.
For that, thank you.
Thank you very much to Asanada Morodi of the Tikina Mburetu, Corona Kumbu, Tonga Village Catholic Women's League, Buluratu of the Draumakita Women's Club, and Renuka Ram of the Grace Women's Ministry, talking environment security. After the break, we'll be back and we will be talking about one of the most essential ingredients in development planning, and that's gender equality. Back to the girls.
Thank you, Sharon. And a reminder that if you are in Suva, you can tune in to FemTalk 89 FM Suva from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. all weekend. And FemTalk 89 FM from Lambasa can be heard from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. on weekdays.
After the break, we continue with FemTalk 89 FM radio with pictures.